They're like, why does it take this long? Why did God make our bodies this way? And it's my personal belief that God said, okay, women, they do so much for everyone else. They're always taking care of everyone else. So let's just make it so that she can just sit back and relax and be taken care of and nurtured and replenished in this way. And we're looking at it as a problem when it really should be a blessing, right?
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. I strongly believe that one of the paths to building a stronger marriage is by doing the work necessary to have a great sex life as a couple. But why start with sex? Why not start with emotional connection or dating or things like that? Although I think those things are really important too. It's because that there's just a strong link between pleasure and emotional connection. When you can increase and broaden the pleasure you experience as a couple, you'll also find your emotional and spiritual connection deepening as well. Besides, doing the work necessary to have a great sex life forces individuals to learn how to deeply love their spouse like they've never loved before. It requires trust, self-confidence, and an open heart. In short, developing your sexual relationship leads to more personal growth than anything else that I know of. Unfortunately, there's an orgasm gap in many marriages. Although orgasm isn't the only measure of a great sex life, it's a good enough proxy measure for the pleasure a couple enjoys in sex, so we're going to go with that today. I believe women are just as capable of sexual pleasure as men are, if not more capable than men are. And even though just about every person on the planet is capable of experiencing the pleasure of an orgasm in sex, in far too many marriages, women aren't experiencing orgasm as frequently as men do. Today, my guest is my friend Amanda Lauder, and together we hope to shed some light on the orgasm gap and help you close it in your marriage. Amanda is a fellow marriage and intimacy coach. She is the host of the podcast Sex for Saints, and we're going to talk about practical strategies to help you overcome your orgasm gaps in your marriage today. We're also going to talk about sex toys that are used as an aid for pleasure as a couple. Did you know that over 70% of those that responded to my poll on Instagram say that they have used or currently use a vibrator? I thought that was pretty cool. Many people are curious about buying a vibrator, but don't know where to go to buy one without feeling weird about it. And if that's you, you can open the Intimately Us app and go to the Learn section, then the products we love for my personal recommendations from trusted companies and brands. I'm recording this podcast episode at the very end of September, or Sextember, if you will. And I hope you and your spouse has made this month an extra special month in finding ways to connect sexually a little bit more than ever. Remember to take your selfie tomorrow if you haven't yet. And if you remember to take your selfie at the beginning of Sextember, compare your before and after photos and see if you can tell the difference in your countenances. Now let's get right into the episode. Amanda, welcome back to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. How are you today?
I'm so good. I'm so happy to be back with you, Dan.
I admire you. You're very knowledgeable and you teach a lot from your own experience. Now, you've been married twice. You're in your second marriage.
Yep.
And can you talk a little bit about the orgasm gap you had in your first marriage?
Yeah, it was quite large. I didn't know how to orgasm. And so I didn't experience an orgasm until I was about 12 years into the marriage. So the orgasm gap was very large. He was having lots of orgasms and I was having exactly zero. And it wasn't until I really started to overcome my sexual shame and understand my body, got some toys, that I was finally able to experience my first orgasm. But that was 12 years into our marriage.
Gotcha. Was it just lack of sex education, like knowing that
Yeah.
women orgasm?
Well, I mean, I knew that women orgasmed, but I had no idea how. I think I pretty much assumed that it came through penetration. I didn't understand or know that I had a clitoris, and then that's where women's orgasms came from. And so I just really didn't have the knowledge there. And I had so much sexual shame that I didn't feel like I could get the knowledge. I didn't feel like it was
Yes.
appropriate for me to, read books or, watch TV programs. They didn't have podcasts back then, but didn't they're just
No.
the information was not as readily available as it is today. And so that shame kept me from even looking for sources that would be
Mhm.
appropriate for me to learn more about myself and my body.
So in those first 12 years, did you kind of have an inkling that something was missing, or were you oblivious to something was
Oh,
missing
I knew. I
until
was very
something?
aware. I was
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
very aware, and it's not for lack of trying. I mean, we both were
Uh-huh.
trying to help me have more pleasure and experience
Uh-huh.
orgasm, but, and it also made be without having those orgasms, it made it so that I mean, sex just wasn't fun for me at all, and I didn't
Uh-huh.
really have a lot of the emotional connection there either, so it was purely for him, and it
So
wasn't
it's
for me at all.
one-sided.
It was
Yeah.
very one-sided. Yeah.
So it wasn't just orgasms, it was things were off emotionally,
Yeah. I
just
mean,
in
hence why we
sync
got
with
divorced
everything too.
later. Because even when I did
Yes.
learn
Uh-huh.
how to orgasm, the marriage was still pretty terrible, so that's
Uh-huh.
why we
Uh-huh.
parted ways, but yeah, there was a lot of things lacking.
So in your 12-year mark, what happened? What was the event? Was it a conversation you had with someone? Was it a book you read? What
Yeah.
was it that
Well, I
turned the corner for you?
I realized how much our marriage was struggling, and I thought maybe if the
Uh-huh.
sex gets better, then our marriage will get better.
Uh-huh.
And I was watching Oprah on network television when she was back on,
Yes.
TV every afternoon,
Uh-huh.
and she had on 2 sisters that specialized in sex. One was a psychologist and one was a urologist. And they were very female-centric and very empowered, and they talked about female sexuality in a way that I had never heard before. And so a lot of the messages that I had gotten is that sexual women were bad and, they
Mhm.
were sluts or what, all these different words that we
Yes.
use.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
And so if, I equated that if I became more sexual and really like looked into my sexuality, then I would be one of these, women. And I didn't want to be that.
Right.
And
You'd lose your value. Right.
yes.
Uh-huh.
And I
Uh-huh.
really saw that if I gained in my sexuality, it would also disconnect me from God. And I really didn't want that. But the way that they talked about it was very empowered and like female centric, but like in a very not shameful way. It was beautiful. And so I was like, well, maybe I can start looking into more of their information because they talk about it in a way that aligns with my values. And so I started like reading everything that I could from them, getting on their
Uh,
websites. One of the sisters had a show on Oprah's network, and so I started watching all the episodes of that show. And started talking about vibrators, and I was like, "Oh no, good women do not use vibrators." And
uh-uh. Uh-huh.
and so I finally talked to a couple of my friends that are of my same faith, and just telling
Uh-huh.
them like some of the struggles that I had and they were like, "Well, do you not have a vibrator?" And I was like, "Wait, do you?" Like, I was so
Uh-huh.
baffled by this, and they're like, "Of course we do." And it kinda just gave me the permission that I needed, and so, like, I promptly went on Amazon and bought 4 of all different, like, shapes and sizes and different things and figured it out
Mhm.
and finally started having orgasms, and things got much better in the sex department in our marriage, but the marriage was still pretty terrible, so
I'm so glad you have good friends that you can turn to
yeah,
and talk to about that,
yeah.
and they'll give you a straight, honest answer.
Yeah,
That
it
is
was
so
pretty
good.
good. It was pretty good. So,
That's so cool. Alright, so then you got the vibrator, like, "Hey, this is actually nice."
yeah, this is a good thing. I actually like this.
Uh-huh. That really brings us to what we wanna talk about today.
Yeah.
Can you give me any stats or anything on the orgasm gap to kinda illustrate what we mean by an orgasm gap?
Yeah, so Dr. Laurie Mintz in her book Becoming Clitorate talks about a lot about the orgasm gap, and she said in there that a survey of thousands of women and men that 64% of women versus 91% of men said that they'd had an orgasm during their most recent sexual encounter. So, I mean, that's, almost 30% difference in that. And
Mhm.
then in another survey of over 2,000 straight women, it says 57% said they orgasm most or every time they have sex with a partner, while 95% said their partner orgasms most or every time. So again, we're looking
Mhm.
at 35, 37%, 38% that,
Right.
gap in the difference. And I think that's a tragedy.
Yes, and those are often self-reported stats. So the reality is it could be a lot lower
Yeah.
in many marriages
Yeah.
for various reasons.
For sure. For sure.
Health, age, just lack of understanding. Maybe they're too new. Like there's a lot of reasons why there is that orgasm gap.
For sure.
Can you speak to maybe anatomically or biologically why men tend to have orgasms easier than women do?
Well, I mean, orgasm is kind of just built into the mechanism of men having sex, right? Like their
Mm-hmm.
orgasms come from stimulating the penis, while women's orgasms, like, I mean, we typically look as sex through the male lens, which is penetration. And
Right.
about 25% of women orgasm through penetration, but that leaves 75% that don't. And so if you are trying to achieve orgasm through penetration and you're in that 75% category, you're going to be left unfulfilled. And so understanding why that is. Like I get a lot of clients who are like, "Well, I want to learn how to orgasm through penetration." I'm like, "Okay, we can try that." But the biggest factor in that is the distance between the vaginal opening and the clitoris, and that doesn't
Right.
change. So, I mean, it can change like after childbirth and stuff, but usually it's not going to change too much. And so there's a lot of women who will never be able to have orgasms through penetration alone. And we're talking like strictly like no clitoral stimulation. Like if you're stimulating
Mhm.
the clitoris during penetration, yes, you can have an orgasm like while having penetration. But if you're like no stimulating the clitoris and it's just done through penetration, it's probably not going to happen for very many.
Right. Okay. What other things get in the way of a woman being able to orgasm relative to men?
Time. Time is a
Uh-huh.
big one.
Great. Let's talk on that.
Again, we're
Uh-huh.
looking at things through the male lens. Men typically orgasm in 5 to 8 minutes. And, you think about it, like men's orgasms, because they're needed to perpetuate the species, then their orgasm needs to be very quick and precise. And so it
And
makes
reliable.
sense. Yeah, very reliable. Yes. So of course that seems to work, right? But where women's orgasms are strictly for pleasure and not about reproduction, then it's really, just taking the time to make sure that she has hers and making sure she's stimulated in the right way. And again, I get a lot of clients who are like, "Well, I've never been able to have an orgasm." And I'm like, "Okay, well, how long are you spending trying?" Because and they're like, "Well, maybe like 5 to 10 minutes." I'm like, "Oh no, my dear. It does not work like that for
No.
most women." I mean, occasionally you'll get a
No.
woman
No.
that'll happen pretty quickly, right? But for the majority of
Huh?
women, you're looking at 15 to 20 minutes of non-sexual touch, non-genital touch in order to warm up to the point where your genitals are ready to be touched. And then it's probably at least another 15 to 20 minutes of direct stimulation in order to reach orgasm. Now, we can speed that up through toys, but, like, really looking at it, we're looking at 40 to 60 minutes, sometimes even longer, depending on where you are mentally, of really going from 0 to orgasm. And that's like, "Wait, why does it take that long for women?" I mean, I get that a lot from women. They're like, "Why does it take this long? Why did God make our bodies this way?" And it's my personal belief that God said, okay, women, they do so much for everyone else. They're always taking care of everyone else. So let's just make it so that she can just sit back and relax and be taken care of and nurtured and replenished in this way. And we're looking at it as a problem when it really should be a blessing, right? It really is a
Right.
chance for us
Uh-huh.
to learn to be good receivers and to be nourished through our sexuality. But most of us just don't do a very good job of receiving that.
I like that perspective, Amanda. I was
Yeah.
talking to another couple, and the wife was complaining that she takes so long to reach orgasm. And the husband's like, "You're kidding me. If it was any shorter, you'd deny me of the pleasure I have of
Yes.
just being with you for that time. I don't
Yes.
want it to go faster.
No.
I thoroughly enjoy the slower pace of me blessing you." So I
Yes.
love that perspective too.
I love that perspective. And I
And
think it's us as women that are like, this is taking too long. Like, he's probably
right,
bored. He's probably
right,
tired.
right.
And I'm like, oh no, he is not. He is relishing in all of this. Like, there is nothing better for him. He gets his pleasure from seeing you have pleasure. So just sit back and relax
Uh,
and like just enjoy the experience because it's really blessing both of you.
That's right. I have two thoughts on what you just said. Hopefully, I remember both of them. The first is we do tend to have a very male centric approach to sex, right?
Yeah.
Even in our discussion of how long it's taking,
Yeah.
women taking so long, that's a very male standard
Yes.
way of looking at it. But if it was reversed, right, it would be like, what's wrong with guys? How come they're so quick?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
40 minutes should be the standard. There's
Yes.
something wrong with men. They're done in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Poor
Premature
guys.
ejaculation, right?
Over and over again. Like, he can't last that as long as a woman can. Like, there's a problem. So,
Yes. I agree with that. And then what was your second
and
point?
I forgot it. I knew I
Dang
would. I did. There's a lot of things I think that interfere with a woman's ability to reach orgasm in her head. And
Yeah.
one of them is probably this is taking so long, which is
Ye-
something you had just mentioned.
Yep.
So when that narrative is in your head, how does that affect a woman's ability to actually reach orgasm? In other words, what are some of the mental barriers that we're talking about? Like, it's taking so long. And are there others that will really interfere with her ability to get there?
Yeah, when you're so busy thinking about what your partner's thinking or what they're experiencing, you're not being present in your own body. You're not really taking in all of the pleasure and sensations. You're up in your head. And like it's kind of a catch 22 because you do need to think and like fantasize and use your imagination, but it really
Hmm.
is important to pay attention to what you're thinking about that's actually gonna drive that arousal and drive that connection between the 2 of you rather than detract from it. And so, I always talk about, focusing on the physical sensations, really staying present in your body, focus on your 5 senses, focus on your breathing, movement, sounding. All of those things are gonna help drive your arousal rather than slow it down. But if you're thinking like he's bored, he's tired, this is taking too long, that is totally going to stop that because your brain is just shutting everything down where you're trying to ramp it up. And it's like putting up a wall. It just doesn't happen.
Yes. There's another couple that I've coached where she has the capacity to have an orgasm because she has earlier in her marriage.
Yeah.
And then there was a certain time a few years ago where it didn't happen. And ever since then, it hasn't happened.
Mm.
And every time she's being intimate with her husband, the thought is, oh, it's not, how can I make it happen?
Yeah,
And she's so freaked out about it not happening, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy every
absolutely.
single time now.
And I think
How,
that's pretty true.
talk
That's
on that.
pretty true. That happens to like our anxieties. When anxiety goes up, our pleasure and our arousal go down. And men experience this too with their orgasm. Like
Oh,
if they
absolutely.
don't, reach orgasm or they lose their erection, then the next time they're so worried about that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy again. And so I know we're focused so much on orgasms, but sometimes we need to just take orgasm off the table. We need to just, sit back and relax and be with each other and connect and focus on pleasure rather than orgasm so that maybe orgasms actually happen, but it's not this end goal. Like we both have to have an orgasm every single time.
I like that. It's not so much outcome oriented.
Yeah.
You're more about, can I be present right now in this moment
Yes.
rather than
Absolutely.
what outcome are we going to have or not have? And
Yeah. When you're
because
so
anxiety
focused on
always
that.
lives in the future.
Right, exactly. And when you're
Uh-huh.
so focused on like, okay, this needs to happen, that anxiety level is going to go up. And then the likelihood of orgasm is going to significantly decrease.
Great. Okay. I'm glad we have that backdrop and preface. Now, let's talk about practical reasons on how to close the orgasm gap if that's like the direction you both feel like you need to go next. Like anxiety aside,
Hmm.
like what are some practical things? You mentioned toys. Can you talk more on toys?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I love toys.
Great. Well, you're in good company.
Yeah, I know. Here's a funny. So when we did our couples retreat last year, fall of last
Uh-huh.
year, we were both at a different retreat a few weeks beforehand. And you and I were like sitting on a couch ordering toys
Side
for
by
the
side.
couple. And people are like coming behind us and they're like, what the heck are you guys doing? Because we're like,
Oh, we're just ordering
just
toys.
ordering sex toys. No big deal.
And I'm like, So, Amanda, do you like this one? You're
Yes.
like, nah, I like this one. Like, all
Right.
right, we'll order some of those.
Yes. It was so funny.
It's
So
kind of
funny.
fun.
Yes, we are both big fans of toys. And I think, toys are
Uh-huh.
so much they can help that relationship so much and bring that orgasm gap closer. I think figuring out the right toys for both individuals is really important. Some women like vibrators, some women like more of a clitoral suction toy. There's, different shapes and sizes, really figuring out and like sometimes you have to buy a lot of toys to figure out what you like and what works for you. So like if you try
Uh-huh.
one and it's not working well, don't give up because there's probably a different style or shape or something that can be a better fit for you.
That makes sense because you look around, people all have eyes and a nose and a mouth, but they're configured differently.
Yep.
That's what gives us our facial expressions. And I could only think that our genitals are going to be just as unique person to person. So our unique nerve configuration, where
Mhm.
sensation we feel the most, is going to vary person to person. So
Yeah.
certain toys are going to really highlight one person's neuro mapping.
Yeah.
It might be different than the next. So you do gotta try different toys, and the good news is there's plenty to choose
There's
from.
so
There's
many to
lots of
choose from.
variety.
Yeah, like I have some clients so my favorite to recommend for most women is a clitoral suction toy. I'm a big fan of like the Lilo Sona. That's kind of my
Yes.
go-to. But
Mm.
that only works if you have the right configuration where you have nerves that are in the head of the clitoris, but not too many. Because if you have too many, then you're
Yes.
overly sensitive and it can be painful. But if you don't have enough, then it's not going to do a whole lot. And so you'll get some women who hate it, and then you get someone who love it. And then other women who want like the feeling of being penetrated at the same time. So like something like
Mhm.
either a dildo or a rabbit is going to be a lot better for
Mhm.
them depending on the configuration and what they like, right? There's so many different things that you can try, but really figuring out, okay, what feels best to me also making sure that it's not too much stimulation right off the bat, like, you kinda have to work up to stimulation. A lot of times I'll tell women, start, like, maybe through the underwear or through a sheet and see how things start to warm up, and then you can start to remove that, but because a lot of times they're just like, "Okay, stick this straight on my genitals," and
It's like,
that's
"Ah!"
it's too much, or they feel like
Uh-huh.
if they're using a vibrator, they get desensitized because it's so much stimulation too fast. And so really,
Yes.
the good thing about it is it can help you build up faster, but sometimes you still need
Mhm.
to go slow and work into the process. And another good, way to think about things is you're working from the outside towards the center.
Towards
So,
the center.
yes.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, kind of starting on the outside more in the labia and then moving more towards like the clitoris or the vaginal opening, depending on how you are best stimulated.
It's like when you're served a 7-course meal and you have, like, 4 forks. Which fork do you use first?
You start on the
It's the
outside.
outside one first.
Yes.
It's like, really, you need good manners.
Yes.
Like, you're gonna
Yes,
try on the
well, and
outside and
I
move
mean, I
workers
think
right in.
so there's another point to this. I think men tend to like you to just grab on and hold on to their penis and be like they're good for just like a whole bunch
Rough with
of
it.
yeah, like they like more a
Lot
harder touch,
uh-huh.
right? Where women tend to need a softer touch and a softer approach and
Mhm.
then work up more. And men tend to just like go straight for the genitals instead of like learning to warm things up in other areas and then start on the outside and work towards the middle. And when you go straight for the clitoris, that's not usually pleasurable for women and can often
No.
not just not be pleasurable, but can also be painful. And so, really
Mhm.
understanding like, do not go straight for her clitoris and don't go straight for penetration either, because women's vagina opens and lengthens as time goes on. And so, if you're trying to go straight for penetration and she's not ready to receive you, it can be very painful for her.
To prepare for this episode, I polled my Instagram audience about vibrators. And one of the questions I asked is, "Husbands, how do you feel about your wife using a vibrator?" And a lot of the responses, I think you'll love, Amanda. This is what they're saying. This guy says, "I love using a vibrator on my wife. She never uses it alone on herself. I love getting her to climax with it." Another man said, "I'm totally fine. In fact, I love it. She is a more active participant instead of ragdolling it when we use a vibe."
Yes.
And another man says, I used to feel intimidated. Now, more power to us. And it's fun.
Yes.
Let me read just a few more. Another man says, I love it. To me, it just enhances the whole experience for us. Her pleasure is ours. And another said, it's super hot. We only recently begun working seriously at closing our orgasm gap, and this is the golden ticket.
I love
So I
it.
think a lot of people, they're enthusiastic about using this as a tool to help them in their relationship have more pleasure.
Yeah, but there's also some who don't. We get some
Now,
men who
so
are
let's talk
very
about those.
intimidated by it, right? They feel like
Uh-huh.
it's going
Right.
to replace him, or that it should just be natural, or, all these different excuses that they like to use when it's really about their own insecurity with it.
That's true. In fact, that was the number one concern people had when we asked them about their concerns. Is it replacing me?
Yeah. And what
They
would you
they do
say
feel
as a man
that.
is the answer to that, Dan?
Uh, no, it's not a replacement. I look at it this way. I want to build a house, let's say. I can frame the house using a hammer and nails, which is a very slow process. I couldn't get it done. Or I can use a nail gun, hooked up to air compressor, bam, bam, bam.
Yep.
It's the same result, but I'm going to be more precise. I'm going to be more efficient. It's going to be more effective. And to me, I look at sex toys as a way to kind of help me get closer to my goal of giving my wife pleasure
Mhm.
in a lot more efficient way. And I'm just using a tool to help me get there. I'm still in charge. I'm still using it. It's not replacing me. I don't think a toy will ever love my wife the way I can love her.
Nope.
I don't think a toy will hug her or comfort her the way I can comfort or love her. It's not a replacement for me. It's a method for me to help me get closer to my goal with her.
Yeah. I mean, a toy is
So,
not emotionally connecting. It's
no,
you can't
it's
you
not.
can't emotionally connect with a toy, right?
Mm-mm.
And there's I think your analogy of building the house is exactly right. A lot of times I use the analogy like you can cut your lawn with a pair of scissors or you can use a lawnmower. Which one would you like to do?
Uh-huh. Right, exactly.
And, I don't know of a single man who wants to be out there with a pair of scissors.
No. No, thank you. I got better things to do.
Right, right. But, wouldn't you wanna
Uh-huh.
spend that time, like, being emotionally connected and touching and
Mhm.
feeling and really working together and just using, like you said, a tool to help her have more pleasure. I think that's awesome. And I mean, there's toys for men too, which is awesome as well.
Yeah, there are. There are. We own a few.
Yeah.
They can be really fun. Okay, here's the next concern that kind of came up in our
Okay.
Instagram polling, and it was, is it scriptural? Is it biblical? How
No,
would
they
you
don't talk about
respond to people?
they didn't have sex toys during the Bible.
Like you said, when you're 12 in your first marriage and you realize like toys are important, and you were shocked when your friends said to you, "Well, don't you have a vibrator?" You're like,
Yeah.
"Good people have that." So
Yeah.
there's definitely a cultural element that we kind of maybe think is religious, maybe a religious culture element, especially
Mhm.
us in conservative backgrounds
Yeah.
that have a stigma against toys. So I think when they say, "Is it scriptural? Is it biblical?" I think a lot of that's bleeding over into that cultural concern. Because
I agree. I
anyway,
think God wants us to have good marriages, and I think God wants us to have good sexual relationships. And,
mm,
we can use a lot of tools to help us have better marriages and sexual relationships. I mean, I think coaching, right, is a great way to learn
yes,
more about things. Books, podcasts, toys, like whatever you can do to strengthen the marriage and strengthen the sexual relationship, I think is going to be pleasing to God. That's my personal philosophy. And just a funny little fact, the vibrator was the fifth appliance to be electrified. Just a little note. Like when they're, like I think it was like an iron and a toaster and a couple other things, and the
uh-huh.
vibrator was the fifth toy to be electrified. And how
Oh,
important
good.
it is.
I'm glad they had their priorities right.
But
It's important.
yeah,
It's
but
right up
of
there.
course, it's not gonna be scriptural, it's not gonna be biblical because they didn't have those things. I'm so glad that I live in today's day and age where those kinds of things
Oh
are
yeah,
available, or else I probably would have gone my entire marriage with never having, an
yeah.
orgasm.
Can you imagine like 150 years ago? Like it'd be tough,
Yeah,
really
yeah.
hard.
I mean,
And
like
for the rare 25% that can orgasm through penetration,
right.
uh,
And I think,
they're the lucky ones,
now
but the
I've
rest.
learned my body well enough to
Uh-huh.
know that, like, I can have an orgasm without a vibrator, right? But
Oh, of course. Uh-huh.
it took understanding my body better and being able to use tools to help me understand that so that I can now do it without a vibrator.
Very good. Okay. The last question I asked my audience, which I think was really good, is what boundaries have you set in your marriage that give you more freedom to explore things like toys and vibrators in your marriage? Because I think boundaries actually give us more freedom
Yeah.
when you work together as a couple. Like, we don't think like boundaries, a lot of people think they restrict because they're enclosed, but they can actually give you a lot more freedom in your marriage. What are some guidelines or some ideas or questions for couples to ask themselves so they can use toys or other materials, tools, whatever,
Mhm.
to enhance their sexual relationship? What are some good questions they should be asking themselves?
Well, I just think like, what do I want out of this experience? What am I looking for here? What is going to bring more goodness to my life and to my marriage and sexual relationship? I think those are always good questions to ask ourselves. I think one thing we have to be careful of is if our partner doesn't agree, that they don't get to necessarily dictate what happens to us and our experience. Like, it's okay for you to not agree, but have open and honest communication about it. Like, sometimes we have a lot of desire when our spouse isn't around or they're out of town. Or I recently did a podcast episode on my own podcast about how to maintain that sexual connection when we're apart from our spouse, like whether they're traveling or they've been deployed or, something like that. And making sure that our partner is satisfied sexually even when we're not around is important. So how can we work together to create a mutually benefiting experience that's going to actually make it so that we can have great sex when we're back together, right? And sometimes that means doing things on our own, like with our spouse. We're not hiding things from our spouse. I never think it's a good idea to hide it.
No.
But even if your spouse doesn't necessarily agree, being strong enough in your own integrity to say, this is important for me. And I know it's actually going to benefit us in the long run. So I'm going to let you work on you and your insecurities, but I'm still going to do this because I want this for us, not just for myself. Like, not doing things for necessarily selfish reasons, but like knowing that it's going to benefit the both of you in the long run, especially women. I think sometimes when we're apart, we tend to shut down our sexuality, thinking like, I can't, because he's not here, I can't engage in this. And that makes it that much harder to re engage when he comes back. And so the more we
Hmm.
can kind of keep that, flame burning, even when he's not
Hmm.
around, the better. And sometimes that means like
Yeah.
doing things on our own with open and honesty with our spouse about it. Like, me and my spouse, we have a just a mutual understanding between the two of us that we always approach the other person first. And if the other person's not in the mood or they're away or whatever, we're free to do things on our own. And that has just
Hmm.
opened up our marriage to having so much more security. And we're not worried about what the other person's doing because we know that our marriage is the priority.
Gotcha. And that's that boundary, that's that conversation that
Yeah.
you've had first.
Yes.
It kind of really helps that.
Yes.
And I like what you're saying here. You're not prescribing that every couple lives the way you do
No.
or makes the same conclusions.
Nope.
But what you're saying is, let's look at what we're pointing to.
Yes.
What's the end goal? What is it that we're going to want to create? And one couple might choose that same path, other couple might choose different paths, but it's like, let's end up at that goal of a sexually intimate relationship through the ups and downs and challenges of life. And how can we get there together?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great summary.
So a lot of men get this message about we need to close the orgasm gap, and they might approach their wives saying, "Hey, let's use a toy." She's against it. Let's try oral sex because they read somewhere that maybe oral sex has a higher likelihood of a woman reaching orgasm, and she's against it. And so he keeps going down the list of tips he hears about maybe on this podcast or in the
Mhm.
app or other things. And it's like a no, no, no. And then he feels this enormous pressure that he has this huge responsibility to close this gap with his wife, but she's like an unwilling participant in closing that gap too.
Yeah.
But he feels like it's all on him. How would you approach or counsel that couple in that situation?
I think everyone's orgasm is their own responsibility. So nobody makes
Mm,
someone else orgasm. Like, orgasms come
Gotcha.
from what we're thinking, what we're feeling, how we're interpreting the context of the sexual encounter. So, yes, you can be stimulating her in certain ways that are more likely for it to happen, but if she is not willing, it's not going to happen. If she has a lot of shame about her body and orgasms, it's probably not going to happen. So, really taking ownership over your part. Are you willing to do whatever it takes? Great. If they're not willing to receive, that's not on you, that's on them. But also listening to her, like, and being curious, not from a place of judging, right? Like, why do you not want this? This is so amazing. You should want this. But like, I want to understand you more. I want to understand why this isn't a priority for you, why you think, you don't deserve this or whatever the reasoning is behind it. I really want to understand that and work together towards doing that. Now, you also have to understand sometimes women just don't want to put in the work for an orgasm. We just don't because it is a
No.
lot of work for most of us, right? And I mean me personally, I think it's work worth doing. I love it, right?
Yes.
But
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but there's some women they're like, "You know what? I'm okay with not doing it right tonight." Believe her. If
Uh-huh.
she really says she's okay. Now, if you're getting into a pattern where she's like, "Nope, not gonna
Uh,
happen, never do it, just go," like, you don't wanna get into the duty sex, right? Where she's just doing it just for you to have an orgasm. That's never going to
no.
produce good result. But really looking at, like, what is her reasoning behind this, and do I want to just believe her and try to make it as good as I can for both of us, or do I wanna sit and press the issue? And usually pressing the issue is not great. Like, men are often like, "I don't know why she wouldn't wanna have an orgasm, like, they're so amazing." And I totally agree with
Right.
that, right? But there are a lot of
Uh-huh.
times where, like, I just don't have the mental capacity. So, then we have to evaluate, am I doing this just for you and I'm gonna resent you afterwards? Or can I freely give and be okay with that? And she's the only one that can determine that. But if you're mapping that in her, that's your job to be like, okay, you know what? This is not working. I'm not willing for you to just have duty sex with me. My orgasm isn't more important than our relationship and what your experience is. So I'm just going to back off. And that's okay too.
And just add a footnote, like for a lot of men, they're offended when their wife refuses or, turns down the
Yeah.
orgasm. Like,
Yeah.
come on, guys. Like, she doesn't want to get there. So don't
Yeah.
freak out that she doesn't want that orgasm. So
Right.
chill out. Calm the
Yeah.
heck down.
Yes. Calm
Okay.
the heck down.
Yeah, that's my favorite phrase. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, good. Great. All right. Now, a lot of people might be listening to this episode thinking, great, I got a lot of work to do. Got to close the orgasm gap so that we're both having orgasms more regularly. Can we just end with a discussion of, like, I guess this is what's on my mind. I think orgasms are important, but they're not the most important thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how we measure ourselves as a man or woman, by our capacity to have an orgasm or not. What is the better measure to know how you're doing in your relationship overall? Orgasms isn't the only measure.
No.
That's what I'm trying to say.
No, it's not. I think just, making sure that you're connected emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. And that can come in a variety of ways, not just through sex, not just
Hmm.
through orgasms, right?
Hmm.
But really, like, is this bringing goodness to my marriage? And do I want to keep going down this path and being pointed in the same direction, like you just said? Like, I think that's the most important thing. So, can we connect in ways that neither one of us are going to have an orgasm? Absolutely. Can we connect in ways where one or the other does? Sure. Right. But it's not about the orgasm per se. It's the connection piece. It's that intimacy piece. It's being known and knowing your partner and working together to create goodness in your marriage. I think that's the most important thing.
That's so good. Make goodness the standard. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
All right, Amanda. I love our conversation. Let's say a couple has really worked through, like, they've defined what kind of a sexual relationship they really want to have. What's their end goal? And they're working hard at closing that orgasm gap. What are your black belt sex tips to take their sex life? Like, they're at baseline, they're doing great.
Yeah.
Really to take it to the next level. Any idea or ideas you want to share? Something fun or exciting they can try that's really next level.
Yeah. Well, I love the quote from David Schnarch where he talks about the meanings that we create in our sexual relationship.
Mm,
And so it's not just
yes.
like a new position or a new toy or whatever to take things to the next level, but it's like, what deeper meanings can we create in this sexual relationship between the two of us? So I had a couple recently who really wanted to take things to the next level, and they wanted to try some like bondage and tying her up and different things. And like, that's fantastic. That's great. If they're both on the same page with that, more power to them, right? But what
Right.
I really wanted to get at the heart is like, what is doing that going to create for you when it comes to meaning in your relationship?
Mhm.
And she was like,
Mhm.
by allowing him to tie me up, it deepens my trust, right? Like, I have to have a
Yes.
whole lot more trust in him that he's going to listen to me, that he's not going to do things outside of what I've consented to. And building that deeper trust with each other creates that deeper meaning. And that's really what takes it to the next level, not necessarily tying her up.
It's not the leather, it's
No.
the meanings that you make
Yes.
with it.
Yes.
Right. Right, right. And a little excitement helps go
Sure.
along, move things along too. But
Yes. Yeah.
that's really good. I like that. For those that don't know you, where's the best place for them to find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Christian Sex Coach. I have a podcast called Sex for Saints. And then I have all the information about me and my coaching programs on my website, amandalauder.com.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.